Two. Hey, everybody. I hope my audio's coming through loud and clear. You have Grant Ellis and the man of the hour, Steven Lumpkin, who is interested in learning more about the giant two words that are floating above our heads as we kind of float through this blissful particle storm. I can't help myself when it comes to these overlays. I was like, oh, I'm doing a show. I better start animating and compositing graphics, and let's do this.
Yeah, not gonna lie, that's some high production value.
Yes. And I think one of the reasons I do opt for the high production value deals with the subject at hand, which we'll talk about today, Invisible Sun. So let's go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience, because I think this is your first time on the WebDM Twitch channel.
Yeah.
We may have some new viewers, and let's see who we got. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, I see a bunch of familiar names that I've seen around the channels that I frequent more often. Dom2D, Fake Alex Blue, Drummer Boy. Hey everybody, I know a number of other folks in chat from the internet. TK, I think Monty Cook Games, obviously. Hello to y'all over there. Grant, obviously I've been mutuals with you on Twitter for quite a while. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Steven Lumpkin at Silent Osiris. The O is a 0. On the internet, I am a games designer now in Amsterdam, working with Guerrilla. And I've been a games designer for the last 8 years in the video game space. And I've also been heavily active in the Twitch scene of pen and paper role-playing games. I got my start about 5 years ago over on Roleplay. Was with them for 3 years or so, and then branched out to a couple of other things. Did some work with the Misclicks, with Nerd Fusion, with right now I'm running a show over on Jesse Cox's channel, and that's a 5th edition show called The Sunfall Cycle. No relation to Invisible Sun, but that's a 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons game in the style of Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Metroidvania style games. So that's going really excitingly. You can find me on the internet at Silent Osiris, all the places. So give me a follow if that's the sort of thing that sounds interesting to you. But we are here today to talk about a really cool looking game that I'm very curious about. So tell me more.
So, yeah, a little bit about my experience and how I encountered Invisible Sun. So there was a Kickstarter that I didn't participate in. I had mostly been exploring, expanding, and exploding with a massive amount of 5th edition content when the game came out. I wasn't focusing on an online presence. I was focusing on a convention presence, not organized play in the traditional sense, but Grant Ellis plays, where I would design adventures. I'd import models and miniatures from all over the world, and then kind of do these elaborate games. And then I was found by members of the Twitch community at a convention that said, hey, you should play with us online. And that's kind of been the story ever since. Earlier this year, I auditioned for a role on Monty Cook Games' Twitch channel for a Cypher system game. And as part of my audition, I said, hey, I've never played this system before, but I love role-playing games, and I'm a pretty quick study, so why don't we do this? I was blown away at the grace and elegance of the system, so I launched my own Cypher system series, which featured Matt Mercer, Marcy Vallon, a couple other luminaries of the online tabletop industry. And then, after that massive success, a hole was left in my heart, and a void that could not be filled remained. I didn't know what it was, so I thought, I was like, you know what, I'm going to run GDQ 1 through 7, I'm going to run Against the Giants, Queen of Spiders, I'm going to do the whole thing, which I did with a phenomenal cast, but there was still this hole. That was kind of like my rebound girlfriend. Loved the campaign, loved my players, but it's just kind of like, it wasn't my true love, and my true love was missing. And that was when I just looked at some artwork for Invisible Sun. Invisible Sun is a surreal fantasy game by Monty Cook Games. For those of you that don't know, where you as characters walk the path of sun. In this game, you play what is known as a Visley, and I will bring some up on the screen. Visley belong to these fantastical magic orders that sort of defines the way it defines their core philosophy about what magic is and how it works, whether magic is a feeling that you have and you express it through manifestations, through art, or magic is a mathematical concept, or magic is all around us. In fact, magic has names, and you can learn those names and summon entities from beyond, or there are those that know magic that feel all those philosophies are false, and there is no invisible church. It's all a lie, and magic is what you make it. And so I went all in on the Monty Cook directed campaign and Black Cube, and launched 4 Twitch shows without having ever looked at the game or the rules or anything beyond art, feeling, and phrases such as, well, if you listen to the David Bowie Diamond Dogs album and you read some Burroughs novels, you'll start to get a sense of what we're looking at. I sort of bought into that, and then once I received my Black Cube, it's sort of been an exploration and a roller coaster in a very interesting game. And Steven's been interested in it because he loves the source, but he has questions about the value, as it is a system purchase. You are buying a system in full and not necessarily the skeleton to create. You know, you're buying a series of paintings, not just the paints and the brush.
Yeah.
You're getting the paintings, the paints, and the brush, as well as some really creepy music to listen to. So,
well, let me talk about like my path to Invisible Sun as far as it's taken me so far. There are overlaps with your experience, Grant, and also diverges from your experience. I've obviously the name Monty Cook is very familiar to me as I was playing Dungeons and Dragons, back 15, 20 years ago during the 3rd and 3.5 edition era. So I'm familiar with a number of his contributions to that body of work. And then as one of the shows that we ran for roleplay, we ran a roleplay R&D session of Numenera, and we ran about eight episodes of Numenera. Book of the New Sun, The Dying Earth, these sorts of stories from Jack Vance and others are major works of love for me. Like I obviously I think there are problems with them if we look at them through modern eyes, but the tone and the inspiration and everything was just so like fascinating, and I had so much fun with that R&D campaign. But apologies to Monty Cook Games in the audience, Numenera as a system didn't quite do it for me. I thought there were some really cool things in it, and I think that the way that you build a character in that system as an adjective, noun, who, verbs is very interesting and also creates really vibrant images. But, at the end of the day, I kind of felt like my experience with games like Apocalypse World or Dungeon World or even King Arthur Pendragon, the system was doing more in those other games to drive play to a certain experience, whereas with Numenera, the system sort of stepped back and said, you can do kind of whatever you want, and here's a whole bunch of inspirational material. And the inspirational material is all material that I loved and really jived with. So that was kind of an interesting moment for me. I think that was pretty early in my exploration of games outside of Dungeons and Dragons, actually. And as a consequence of that, I actually ended up skipping the Cypher system. And so when I saw Invisible Sun come out, I looked at it, and once again, the Monty Cook Games crew have absolutely nailed the themes and the imagery and the inspiration of so much of what I love. In fact, just recently I read a short story by Jeff Vandermeer called The Cage, which is one of his Ambergris cycle short stories. And as I was reading through The Key, which you shared with me, Grant, just before the show, a lot of what was described in the book about, I'm sorry, what's the name of the city that we're living in?
Satyrine.
Saturnine. A lot of the description of Saturnine reminded me of descriptions of ambergris, reminds me of descriptions from what I know of like Fallen London and Sunless Sea. Yeah. So like there's some really cool stuff here. And I think what's happened in my brain is I've said, wow, this seems really cool. I really want to try it out. How can I? And then I looked, and the only option that I saw for really like being a dungeon master and grabbing all the material that I want in order to understand the game was a $250 buy-in. So fortunately, Grant, you saw my distress and my curiosity, and now you're here to walk me through the game and the options that exist for people who like myself who are curious about it. So why don't we start with just like talking me through a little bit of what Invisible Sun is about and like how it plays and what it's like.
So, sure. So, Invisible Sun is a player-driven role-playing game, a game in which the players will set scenes portraying mages, sorcerers, adepts, practitioners of magic, and attempt to recover and reclaim the life that they left when they fled into Shadow. Shadow is essentially the world we're in now. We work jobs as game designers or overweight Twitch streamers, and we live in our day-to-day lives. We have friends, we watch TV shows, we read books. But Invisible Sun presupposes that that is all a lie. That is all a dream.
To me, this is immediately reminiscent of the Chronicles of Amber, which is one of my favorite books. It's super cool. If you haven't read it, folks watching at home, The Chronicles of Amber by Roger Zelazny, and I think his son wrote the second set of 5, is a world in which at the center of everything is a city called Amber, and the world that we live in is a reflection of Amber, but there are many different reflections, and the descendants of the city of Amber can actually sort of like shift reality around themselves until they find themselves back in Amber. So, like that's again like all of the references that I love, that I'm super interested in. They're really captured right there. I love that idea of the Shadow and Saturnine. So tell me more. Keep going.
Yeah, and the reason you went into Shadow is because there was a great and terrible war. It was a war where hate and despair and ill will were the destructive forces. Massive hate cysts, sort of like tumors that manifested all around all of reality, began to destroy and tear the world apart. For a reason unknown to many, the magic users fled into hiding. They went into the Shadow. But now, through the help of an organization and through other methods, the Vizsla are returning. Vizsla meaning us, the magic users. And our city has been ruined and ravaged by war. But now the time has come to discover everything that happened while we were away and what it all means. The reason the game is called Invisible Sun is the theme of the game is that we walk the path of suns. And I'm going to bring up some artwork on the screen for our viewers. So the path of suns really represents the path of the human soul. It begins in silver at creation, which is the topmost sun. In birth, and then you begin to go to the green sun, which represents life, onwards to the blue sun, dreams, illusions, the indigo sun, the gray sun, which represents lies, and then eventually through death in the pale sun, destruction in the red sun, but then rebirth and life again in the gold sun. The invisible sun sits outside the path. That represents magic, which shines its light on everything. And we, being magic users in the game, have a special connection to this magic that we manifest in different ways. A typical scene or session in Invisible Sun, which is a game that includes 3 play modes, which I think it's important to say. How do you play it? It's all good. Yeah. This is all... If we were to play today, how would we do it? Assuming we have characters. The first thing we would do is determine the mode of play. Moment to moment is action mode. That's we're all sitting at the table. We might start and set a scene as players. in a bar, such as Zero's bar, which is a demon that embodies a bar, and it's the place where all the magic users go to get their drinks. If we were at the table together, I might actually prepare drinks that Monty Cook has sent me the recipes for, where they say, this is how the drink at Zero's tastes like. They pay such attention to detail. This is the type of music that would be playing in the background. Really create kind of an intimate and ambience that matches the theme and aesthetic of the world, which I would say, unlike a medieval high fantasy, it's more like 1920s New York. At least in Fartown, which is where all the dangerous spells live. But we would set the scene, we'd talk about who's there, as well as why we are there. And then we as characters are embarking on a character arc, meaning the goal of the game is to grow and evolve as a character. While there is a very expansive, well-described setting full of secrets, the plots and the stories are what springs up around us as characters, and we drive that.
Well, I remember you saying it's a character-driven game, and the other game that I've been playing recently that is very character-driven is Blades in the Dark. Mm-hmm. But as opposed to Blades in the Dark, which posits a city and connections that the players have met and have either made friends with or enemies with over the course of their interactions with the game, it looks like the character-driven aspect of Invisible Sun is driven by what are called character arcs. Is that correct?
That is correct. And you might have a character arc that is research. You are uncover a secret. There is a secret, and you've decided and declared that the secret you're uncovering is there is a number that used to exist between 12 and 13. You know this because the game has revealed this much to you. You know there is a number between 12 and 13. And you know that there is another magic user who frequents this bar that you've arranged to have a meeting with. You're going to buy him drinks, and you figure if you give him enough drinks, he might provide you information where you can study about this missing number that's been forgotten to time. Likewise, my character's there, and I have a romance arc. I'm interested in a lounge performer that performs at this nightclub every third Wednesday of the week. And it's an opportunity to meet and mingle with her and try to develop that relationship. So we kind of establish our goals for the scene. And then the game master is essentially the master of secrets who understands who these non-player characters are, understands the motivations, as well as helps you succeed or fails at the step in your character arc. And you grow through both. The game rewards players through 3 specific types of experience. We can call them experience points. They're a little different than that, but acumen, which is accomplishing story-oriented goals, and then joy and despair, doing activities that either thrill your character or cause them sorrow. If you were receiving medical treatment for a condition in the game and the treatment didn't work out and the consequences looked dire, your character would earn despair. Likewise, if you were healed, you would receive joy. You need to experience both joy and despair to fully advance your character. Likewise, your acumen will allow you to obtain new spells, new secrets, new allies, forge new bonds. The game begins with kind of a world-building session. I know you enjoy world-building. So session 1, to ground you in this unfamiliar setting that you know nothing about, you start creating. The game master's there to provide some help if people don't know. But you start to decide the type of house you live in. Everyone has their own house. And then other players decide who your neighbors are, other points of interest in the neighborhood, any local rumors, issues, or problems. And then you all sort of tie your character's neighborhood together. And then you participate and choose what's called the desideratum, where we as players have decided that we want this to be a narrative that begins with us seeking allies or money or information, or we need to travel to another location. Next week, Game Master, you're going to work that into a narrative, and now you know a bit about our neighborhood. And then the Game Master has all the books. There's 4 beautifully crafted books, like it's keep them nearby at all times, of course.
Yeah.
By the way, you'll notice on the back there's this thing. The books are full of these. There's ciphers, there's codes. So even if you think you've read everything, you will start to realize over time there are many secrets and hidden mysteries reserved for you to learn over time, the more time you spend in the game.
That's very cool. Hang on, I want to pause you because there's two interesting topics that I think we should talk about in a little more detail. One is experience, and two is world building. So, first of all, experience in games is one of my big bugbears. Like, apparently, there have been a number of surveys that have been given to 5th edition dungeon masters, and the majority of 5th edition dungeon masters are moving towards story experience. Basically, which in 5th edition means you earn experience whenever you complete a milestone in the story. And of course, the story, as created by the game master, this is basically just the game master deciding when and how you level up. And I hate that. I don't like it. I could rant for hours about story-driven experience in 5th edition. And the reason I don't like it in 5th edition is because it doesn't put the players in charge of their play, of their objectives. What strikes me as very interesting about the experience system, as I read it in the key, and as you just described, what is it, Crux, which is joy and despair, and then acumen, is that acumen you get for advancing through your character arc, but the character arcs, and there are, how many of them?
There's a number, and then you can always develop custom arcs as needed.
Anyway, just from a glimpse through the book, it looked like there were like 20 or 30 individual character arcs. One of them was birth, is an arc that you can go through if your character, if you want to give birth, then that's a character arc you can go through. There are clear milestones or setbacks that earn you acumen. And that was very, very interesting because, again, even though it is story-driven experience, it feels like a story-driven experience that's in the player's hands. This is in the player handbook. Basically, the key is the player-facing book, right? And then also, joy and despair. Like, I think as you build your character, the different parts of it's not quite as simple as I am an adjective, noun, who, verbs, the way that it was in Numenera and in Cipher System. I think it's a little richer than that. But the parts of your character that you build each establish for you, these are the things that bring me joy. These are the things that bring me despair. So there was something like, I'm remembering something very vague, like when I have a moment of clarity and I see something that brings me happiness, I earn joy. When I have a moment of clarity and I see something that I dislike, I earn despair. And so like, it's all very narrative, but it's all like specific breadcrumbed rewards that the players can pursue by taking action in game. So already I'm really quite liking the experience system.
Yeah, and to quote Monty Cook, he said, players in games will most often participate in the action that helps them stratify and matriculate and gain experience. In Invisible Sun, you as players kind of decide what that is. If you are a player that wants to defeat a foe and engage in combat, you select that arc. Now, whether or not you win or lose, to quote Don Quixote, now does not matter, right? It doesn't matter. It's just that is your story and that is your arc, and you will go on fighting. But likewise, if you want to either create new life or discover and create a new spell, or sometimes it can be something simple such as develop a relationship. You just want to make a friend, and you choose the story. Saturnine and the actuality and all of the suns are the backdrop, and you set scenes in various locales, and then you watch stories happen, and it's been amazing to watch unfold. Now, you also wanted to talk about world building as well.
Yeah. Now, this is another area where I think I might be a very particular and peculiar consumer of tabletop role-playing game products. I know that many TTRPGs that have extensive world building sell very well, and lots of people Love buying huge splat books that have detailed descriptions of settings and NPCs and people. And I, alas, perhaps to my detriment, am not one of those consumers. I love a role playing book that gives me the tools I need to invent the stuff that I want when I want it within the structure or within the theme of the fiction. Um, so, like, talk to me a little bit about world building. I saw that point at the start of the game, that session 0, when you've built your characters and you're building the bonds that tie your characters together, when you're building the neighborhood. Is that the neighborhood you all live in, or is that each of your individual neighborhoods?
You have a choice to either live near each other or in different parts of the
Yeah.
town.
So I
And
love the injection of player contribution within this, within the framework and the structure. What's the rest of the world like? Is it defined very rigidly within the other source books, or is it, or do the source books give the game master tools to create and expound upon the portions of the world?
they start to give you a few paragraphs depending on the location, as well as several NPCs, as well as events that might happen if you're in that town. They also have an extensive chapter both on game mastering a surreal setting as well as designing for a surreal setting. And
Nice.
Monty Cook also cautions you about here's how you know if you've gone too far and nothing will make sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I really enjoy the game master section of this book because it even begins. Now, I know if you've bought this game, you've probably run lots of role playing games and you're about to skip this section. Stop, please!
Don't
And
do
he's
that.
just, no, he goes, I've run lots of D&D, I've written lots of D&D books, including the third edition Dungeon Master's Guide. He says, I've run lots of Numenera, I also designed that game. I run Invisible Sun very differently than I run Dungeons and Dragons or Numenera in any other role playing game, so I need to slow you down. I just need to walk you through the process. And even the surreal design, he goes, you might be coming up with a surreal creature and you have no idea where to start, so you simply say, a 9 foot tall beast that has dogs for arms. He goes, okay, that's really weird looking. But then you can start to shape that. Maybe it's just these hairy appendages and there's these mouths with sharp teeth on the end that also sniff and smell things. And he really gives you good examples of how to mash up two things, then put a spin on it to make it weird, which is kind of his forte. He also provides you, because not everyone's going to be as creative, and some people, like when I played it with Eric Vulgaris, he explained surreal's not his go-to.
Yeah.
So, they provide prompts just on simple handouts like, hey, here's, 100 surreal location sites or scenes that you can just inject or, show a player just to kind of get their head going, as well as, another 200 for NPCs. Just, hey, here's how you can help make them surreal.
Is that
As
like
well
a
as
table you can roll on or something? Or just
Uh,
like a list of
just a
ideas?
list. However, they're bigger on the physical play aids where it's here's a deck of cards. Like
Hmm.
Numenera had the weird deck. Let's play
Yep.
cards. The game set comes with 17 decks of cards, which I think is more like 4 categories.
Hmm.
All designed to help the player. And if you back the Kickstarter, you receive a searchable text file as well. So as the game master, you don't have to search through 1,000 cards. You just search and read. Yeah, they're very, very helpful in both understanding what I will call, to borrow a term from Vincent Baker, the thrust of the setting to really get it. This is the feel that you want, as well as this isn't a fast paced game. This is a game that moves at the player's pace, and let them know it's okay if their characters just want to sit back for a month and research because they need to take appropriate time to research. So that's why the game has 3 modes: moment to moment in action, narrative, which I describe as elliptical edits in filmmaking. We use dissolves, we use fade to blacks, we show a passage of time and kind of ask the characters broadly. And then the third mode of play really hits it home that once you start playing, the game never stops. Development mode, where you're going to be building your characters and advancing them and participating in maybe side scenes, flashbacks, flash forwards, and just really start defining them as a character. and that doesn't require everyone to be at the table. It doesn't even always require a game master. Many of my players write fiction about their characters and just post it to
Yes.
me on the Discord. Some say, I just need you to answer a question because this is going to involve a task where the outcome is uncertain. So they give you this divinatory deck of tarot-like cards, which I'll bring up on the screen for
Is that the Sooth deck?
the Sooth deck, which is a
Yeah.
deck where each card has roughly 4 purposes. It has a divination meaning, a way to impact the game narrative, and a way to end a scene with either joy or despair. I use this in all my games as almost a donation incentive. Is, hey, donate $50 and we will donate that money to charity, but play a Sooth card from Invisible Sun to advance the narrative or add a complication to the scene or a boon to the scene.
Yeah.
But it's
Do you have? I'm sorry. Do you have the cards with you? Could we see the actual deck?
I can send you a link to all the cards. I have them somewhere, Steven. Yeah, I have.
So,
I have
like,
2 Sooth decks.
You've talked about, again, like a couple of things that I'm really interested in. One is this explicit calling out of like the modes of play and how there's moment to moment play, yes, but then there's also this longer narrative play. One of the interesting things that caught my eye when I was reading The Key was that the game explicitly assumes a handful of moments of adventuring over a number of months, that Visle are people who spend a lot of time at home or spend a lot of time researching or reading or sort of like experiencing existence. And so not every moment is spent adventuring. And some games like Dungeons and Dragons, I think is easier to assume most of the time at the table is spent moment to moment adventuring, in contrast with a game like King Arthur Pendragon, which explicitly says each game session is 1 year of time, represents the most interesting adventure that happened over that 1 year. And then that what was it, development mode is very interesting. I've always personally been a fan of when a group gels just right and people want to continue thinking about their characters outside of the table, away from the table, continue development, think about where they want to go with things. To explicitly call that out is very interesting. I haven't seen another game do that yet. Are there like rules for framing the way development play works?
For sure. They describe how it would work and when to play a Sooth card within the Game Master adjacent book. They sort of explain, so when you're running the game, here's when you'll want to use development mode, and here's some ways you can handle it. And actually on Monty Cook's website, or their YouTube channel, they show, here's sort of a physical Sooth deck, by the way. It's a round card, and somewhere I have that demonic-looking hand statue, and eventually, you place cards in there. It's also important to note, too, not quick side tangent, as you're playing the game, anytime you move to a new location, someone takes a wound, there's a story-centric moment, you play a Sooth card on the Path of Sun's game board. And they have an app, so you can do it digitally as well. And it impacts the way magic works in the game. And so some magic will wax, some magic will wane. Sometimes certain characters, their heart, who they are inside, their unchanging core, is either enhanced or deflated. It's an interesting way to sort of watch the game never be sort of static. It remains dynamic. I have sent a deck of Sooth cards through the Twitch chat as well, just to see the artwork and the detail. But development mode, they offer suggestions on how to frame it. There's lots of different reasons why you might enter that. I played it with our mutual friend Eric, largely because Eric had to miss 2 sessions unavoidably, but we had to advance his narrative. So we were like, well, let's talk about what goals you wanted to accomplish during this time, and then let's just you and me play out a scene. We could have played out that scene through text messages, Twitter direct messages, in-person conversation, a casual conversation, but then we always simply play a Sooth card to kind of determine, okay, this is the magical element of this scene. Maybe something happened that was outside of our control. I've had players lose their significant other in dramatic fashion, magical fashion, surreal fashion because of the Sooth card. Their boyfriend was introducing them to the secret church they belong to with just one chapel that's hidden. An actual canonical secret that you only know if you manage to find a slip of paper taped in the underside of a shelf in the black cube. Oh, we have this secret. And they went. The sentinels outside the church. You can't enter this chapel, and you're not supposed to bring an outsider. Played the Sooth card, and it said, an NPC dies suddenly.
Nice.
But you're not gone out of the game. You're simply a ghost because it's the actuality. It's surreal. A ghost can still exist. And really interesting both advice on how to handle it. And it's great to just empower characters because then when Eric did show up, he didn't feel like he had missed 2 weeks of play. He came with, I have some narrative information that I need to share with you all.
Yeah, right.
Because I learned some things.
That's very interesting. Do you think that Monte Cook Games designed that intentionally to be used as a filler for when players had to miss sessions?
They explain that in the book. They say it happens. Sometimes someone last minute just can't show up.
You know, I love that. Like, you know, I'm a designer and a guy who is very willing to be open when I'm not a fan of a thing, and I was a little bit of that earlier. But I gotta say, for an RPG to acknowledge that not everybody's going to be there every session, like people, the hardest thing in real life for me, even me, the guy who is like does tabletop RPGs online a whole lot, hardest thing about RPGs is getting people together to play. And so having a game where mechanics explicitly call out, sometimes people aren't going to be there, here's a thing that you can do with them. That's fantastic. I think the only other game that I saw sort of a hint in that direction was Apocalypse World and the love letters from the GM, something like that. And even that, I think, was maybe like a footnote in one chapter. So that was very interesting. The other thing that I want to call out, Fake Alex Blue said it perfectly, up a little bit higher. They said, love tarot-style cards as a way to introduce story elements. In a way, they're like a well-crafted and otherworldly wandering monster random encounter table. Like, tarot is a fascinating thing for me as a designer just because it's like directed free association. You put 3 cards down on the table, upright or reversed, and you get inspiration from them. And so the inclusion of a tarot-style deck as a mechanic in Invisible Sun is super intriguing. I'm actually just like waiting with bated breath for the first tabletop role-playing game that's just played out with a deck of tarot cards as the core mechanic. I can't wait. Someone's got to make it. I need it.
I may be working on one, Unrestful Hearts in the Garden of Glory, which is a sort of Final Fantasy Tactics aesthetic, smooching soldiers with the backdrop. It's inspired by Pendragon and things like that. But I was like, I want this egalitarian romantic fantasy. And a lot of it, you know, the mechanics in Invisible Sun help inspire that.
Awesome.
Interesting to note about this, it came in kind of a cool little box, and I had it. And then just one day I took the cards out, and I noticed a little slip of paper tucked underneath, and I pulled it out. And, of course, another secret, another message. And it just hit me with, by the way, here's a thing you might want to know. And it's like, chest pains, but I'm like, this goes deep. It's the type of game where your buddies who are also game masters send you text messages at 5 a.m. They're in West Coast time, you're in Europe time, I'm on East Coast time, and just 5 a.m. their time, they go, I have a theory. They send it to you, and then you go, turn to page 93 of The Gate. Oh, and I'm like, yeah, so I love.
So you're hinting, you're touching on something that's very interesting to me. So obviously the bugbear in the room is the price, right? Like, you know, when I look at the Kickstarter and I see to get a copy of the game, and to me that includes like everything that I need to run it, everything that I need to sit down with all of my friends and have an evening or 5 of good fun. Okay, what do I, $49. That's usually what I expect. 1 copy of Player's Handbook. No, wait, scroll down. $250. Ooh, that's hard. But what I'm hearing, and so interestingly, like I spoke about that on Twitter. I was like, I'm very curious about Invisible Sun, but am I $250 plus shipping curious about Invisible Sun? And I got like 5 people responding to me saying, hey, I bought it and I got to tell you, it's worth every penny. And that was very interesting. And so like, there's all sorts of like discussions about capitalism and the inequality of wealth and the accessibility of RPGs. But what I'm hearing from you is that Monte Cook Games, their products always are very, very high production quality, but it sounds like there's a lot of care taken to the packaging of the material almost as a part of the game. And you're talking about like ciphers that you can decipher by learning the language of the game, or secrets that you can find hidden within the physical material. It sounds, dare I make this comparison, almost like an escape room in a box.
100%. It essentially becomes an ARG, altered reality game, and they did that as part of their marketing. First, the Path of Sun's website, and then it turns out each graphic is linked to a geocache, and eventually you finally come to a puzzle in the room, and when you solve the puzzle, it says Invisible Sun, and then they launched their Kickstarter. They did that with every element of the game. There's still puzzles that we haven't even begun to solve that I've created massive spreadsheets on. And, an example is you simply start reading the book, you start picking apart the cipher, you figure it out, you start to decode it almost naturally, and then one day you decode one and it gives you one of these. And I'm simply going to put a link in Twitter chat, and then you decode another word that says this, and you plug that into that, and it gives you more supplemental material for your game that as you are running the game for your players, they're starting to figure things out. It immediately becomes useful. But it's kind of a game within a game. The escape room analogy is really good, just to give everyone on screen just kind of a look at the website. I'll crop the URL because secrets are secrets for a reason. Essentially, I can bring this up. Whoop. And then, I start typing things in here. The book are just full of these quotes and things like that, and you get email addresses that you send an email to, and they respond with a spell that's useful in your game. Really a lot of cool stuff, but very, very explicit attention to detail, making sure you get your money's worth. And I want to talk about that. So
hang on, let me pause you just for a second. Like, if I as a player like saw this Kickstarter and was like, oh, that seems cool, and I don't know who Grant is, and I don't know who Sound Osiris is, and I've never seen this, and I don't watch any streams, and I buy the box, are there ways for me to find these sites and these clues and these things
100%
in the material that I receive? So that's actually fascinating to me. I want to make a reference. One of the first game that I was a designer on was The Secret World, which posited that there is a secret world hidden behind our real world, and that you, as a recipient of the magic of Gaia, can now access these secret societies and be a part of the secret world. It relied heavily on augmented reality games, these little puzzles that people figure out together as a group and say, hey, did you see that, like, on the other page of the website, like, as if you convert the PNG to binary, you get an audio file, and if you run that through Morse code, it turns into blah. Like, that stuff it's not my bag, but it's really interesting. And I think what you're about to talk about is the attention to detail. And that stuff shows an impressive dedication to attention to detail. I call this out. So, like, first of all, Grant, this isn't a sponsored stream, right? I want to call that out.
Not sponsored. Hashtag not sponsored.
Not sponsored on your side, not sponsored on my side. I am here as an uncertain doubter of the game. And actually, a lot of what you're saying is, like, ringing a lot of my bells. I'm coming away pleasantly surprised, and also I can see why a company like Monte Cook Games would want to guarantee a given experience to the people who buy into the game. I would like to eventually, in another 10, 20 minutes, whatever, when we decide to wrap up this conversation, when we have to go, I would like to talk again, circle back to the price, but you're telling me a lot of things that are very interesting to me that I hadn't actually known. And I think maybe like the messaging of the product and the Kickstarter itself fail to make clear, but are very exciting. So anyway, please continue.
Yeah,
I'm just about to
I'd
talk
say I
about.
wish every company had, you know, a brand ambassador who, because you have game designers who are in the trenches designing games, and you have hardworking game designers that are doing double duty as marketing people and trying to teach themselves how to stream on Twitch.
I
Me,
wouldn't know anything
fortunately,
about that.
yeah. So, and then I think, hashtag not sponsored. Full disclosure, I have no affiliation with Money Cook Games as sponsored. I am a cast member on one of their shows for no pay as a volunteer. But I sort of take it apart as a philosopher, a student of art, a classically trained surrealist, someone that produces shows, as well as spent 3 weeks decrypting a cipher because I fell down that rabbit hole.
Nice.
And it was all before I started my streams. It's one of those things where, yeah, it's hard to get that message across, and it's one of those things that as you live it, you see it and you believe it, and then you can share it. So
Right.
it's a game
And
that
that's
came.
what you're doing with me.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I've it's one reason why I expanded from 3 shows to 4 shows, and I tried to make the game as available to as possible, by simply inviting everyone to play and introducing people, running one shots, going to conventions, and saying, "Look, let me talk about and let me show this from a gamer to gamer." Right? It's like not a pitch man, just gamer to gamer. This is why I love this game, and this is what it does very well. If you're looking for this sort of deluxe play experience, it delivers in spades. From the props, I mean, it comes with a heavy, like 5-pound statue that's beautiful. It
What's
comes
the
with
material on the statue? I need to know.
it's resin, but it's painted to look very metallic, sort of gold
Yeah.
and silver. You get 2 large cloth maps, one of the Path of Suns, one of the City of Saturnine. You get a set of dice. You get 4 source books, a deluxe art book, the deck of divinatory cards, and then 17 packaged decks that are play aids. So while you're playing, if you get stuck, well, let's give you another cipher-like object, not a cipher though. Let's give you an ephemera object. Let's give you an incantation. Here are basic spells that maybe people have, and they make it both an intimate and deluxe play experience in person. But since you're dealing with surrealism and imagination, it translates very well online. If it didn't, I wouldn't be able to do 4 shows with almost no physical props to hand between the players. But still, you can translate the sort of dreamlike experience the best that you can, because they empower you to do that through game design, storytelling, production value, and of course, most importantly, imagination.
Yeah. That's okay. All right. I am now at this point, 75% of the way through our conversation, more curious than I entered. And already I was very curious. I think one of the things that you pointed out was the art. And I think Monty Cook Games products have always had a really high production quality in terms of the books that you get and the art that's included in them. And I love surrealist art. I ran a show called The Stories of the Weird that I intended to make into a longer series. I only ever ran one episode of it as a Kickstarter reward for backers of I forgot what it was, convention. Anyway, one of the elements in the story was the moon stepping down out of the sky and searching for the people who had stolen the poisons that the moon needed to begin waning again. And imagery like that is drawn directly from my love of surrealist art, which inspired a lot of the West Marches, a lot of the show that I'm currently running now, a lot of the Stories of the Weird, and the art that has been teased as a part of the Kickstarter for Invisible Sun is just top notch. Like, not just top notch for a tabletop role playing game, but like top notch inspirational surrealist art. There's a piece of artwork. Maybe I can actually look in the drive that you sent me to show off a couple of these things for me and highlight for you at least which one I'm talking about. It looks exactly like something Zadislav Bakinski would produce. Yes, it's this one with a statue of an angel whose wings look like bones or webbing, and there are like maybe corpses, maybe statues around it. Art apparently
I
by
see it.
Chris Cold.
It's Rivenholm. So
Awesome.
it's a sad area in the city of Saturnine, and it's interesting because there's sort of this idea in the game of this uncreated creator that left a legacy. So you find angels on street corners that are trying to preserve that legacy, and it's a dangerous place to be. There's one cathedral to the legacy in Saturnine, and perhaps all the actuality, and angels aren't allowed to go inside. And I love the idea that a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? And a
Yeah.
lot of times I'll write an RPG adventure regardless of system just by looking at some beautiful, evocative artwork, which is why I feel the art of the game was so important. Because it's one thing to say, you see a statue, you might be limited in your descriptive ability. But if you show the players just the picture, they immediately get a sense of feel based on both intrinsic and extrinsic qualities of them as people, but they'll see the picture and they'll feel an overtone and they'll get it.
Yeah.
I love that with this game.
So, really quickly, talk to me about the way the mechanics create the feeling of all of this stuff that we've been talking about, these secrets and the art and the way the box as a physical object feels almost like an escape room or a puzzle object. Talk to me about the RPG mechanics, excluding all that other stuff. If I didn't have the art, if I didn't have the box, if all I had was the rules and dice and the moment to moment play, whether that's adventure mode or narrative mode or development mode. Tell me about the mechanics and how they drive to the experience
Sure.
that is very clearly supremely well understood by the authors in terms of creating the atmosphere.
So, and I'm going to bring up kind of there being a Monte Cook game, it's very graceful. I won't say rules light. I will say that it is a graceful system where they give you a simple core mechanic to solve any action, where a challenge is set by a dungeon master based on circumstance. It might be that this is a challenge 9 monster. The monster's challenge is 9 to hit it, or to avoid being hit by it. And then a player will roll a 10-sided die and modify that roll based on their level of skill, the type of tools they're using. They will have points in these pools that they can spend that are finite to kind of invest themselves in the action. They might have magical effects. They might be using a special pool called Sortilege to let them roll multiple dice to try to enhance their odds of success. And if they equal or surpass the challenge number, they succeed. And then we narrate the outcome based on that. And a simple example, you could use any set skill task from any RPG. We're trying to lift a car that's really heavy, but I'm a trained bodybuilder who's using my gauntlets of lifting heavy objects. By the way, I'm going to spend some points of physicality because I want to
My
make sure
gauntlets of lifting heavy cars.
Yes, and it might even be. Oh, by the way, those are fake gauntlets. We have a powerful magnet, like from the Brave Little Toaster, that just pulls cars up. We have it set to very low, and you create sort of the fiction and talk through the scene. Kind of becomes a conversation with the game master. And I love games that allow you as a player to converse with the game master a little bit, just to kind of set the scene. And then you roll. It uses a D10 as opposed to a D20. And it's similar when you are casting magic using other objects. Likewise, it uses abstract positioning in scene, so you're not playing the game with minis on a map.
Yeah, you're
Although
not
you
measuring
could
5 foot squares.
you could meter hexes. We
Yeah.
play with those only for my friends that play the fantasy trip.
Yeah.
But yeah, you might use some tokens to show abstract positioning to help people that maybe have a hard time remembering if something is close, near, far, or very far. And yeah, you simply play the game with that, and then you have these pools. I'll bring the pools up on the screen that really represent kind of your physical aspects, tangible aspects, and then your unseen aspects. Most importantly to me is sorcery, which is what you use to cast spells and do things of that nature. And these are replenishable pools. You can refresh them several times over the course of the adventure, but you're limited in your ability to refresh them. Likewise,
It's something like you have 4 refreshes a day, an action 5 minutes,
something
half an
like
hour, an
that.
hour, or something like that.
Very similar to that. I think they actually did it, since time is very weird in the actuality. It's like you have 2 instants and 1 you need to wait an hour for.
Yeah.
And you get 3. A little different than Cypher or Numenera. But yeah, you essentially assign these pools at the time of character creation, and they sort of stay that way till you advance your character. And these could determine anything from flirting with a librarian to summoning the black cube itself to running away from law enforcement. That's really the core mechanic. It's very graceful, very simple. And then I want to talk a little bit about the way magic is cast. Those orders,
Yeah.
which we talked about earlier, each order's method of magic is a little unique. I want to put the Maker's Matrix. This is a good example of a development mode scene where it goes, I'm going to my workshop, I got all these components, and I want to make a gun that simply freezes demons in time when I shoot it in the air. So if there's any demons in the room, all the demons will stand still.
Yeah.
Let's go through the process of making.
I love the Maker's Matrix. The only other game that I have read, and I'm far from an encyclopedic knower of games, but the only other game that I've read that talks about the rules and the steps for crafting a thing is Blades in the Dark. And I love the questions that John Harper has proposed for setting the challenge for crafting a thing. I think the Maker's Matrix is like another very interesting way of looking at that similar question. But I love that this game understands that that's a thing players want to do at the table and provide rules for it.
Yeah, the every school of magic, with the exception of apostates, because they kind of steal from everyone, has these sort of unique systems. The Goetics, they determine how they want to approach the angel, demon, ghost, or other entity. Are they going to bribe them? Are they going to coerce them? Are they going to intimidate them? How does this work?
Goetics are like demon summoners, right?
Yeah. The summoners, and then they explain what they're going to use this entity for. It's always a lot of fun, particularly to play with NPCs. I think the Goetics get to... it's what separates them as something special. Likewise, they can still cast basic spells. There's over 100 spells in these cards that they can learn, so they still get to use traditional magic as well as create a summon entity companion. The Vancian spell casting's interesting. This is where, you get into that Dying Earth. You have these decks of spell cards that are various shapes and sizes. I think I have a few next to me, and I also have some other PDFs open. The Vancian spell card is shaped differently than this general spell card, and that's because you have to fit them in this matrix, which represents your brain, where you're storing things in.
So you're playing like physical Tetris with the cards on the tabletop.
Yeah, it's
that's really cool.
And you can just kind of fit the spells many, and your goal is advance. They give you blank cards. Is to invent your own and name spells after yourself because it fits your philosophy of magic. Likewise, those are the mechanics. There's many secrets and clues hidden on the props of the game. This that I brought up, we just finished yesterday translating and deciphering the demon script. This was a new script that was uncovered to us, and we're like, we spent several days cracking the code and learning what
Nice.
all these things say. And it's one of those things, game master to game master, everyone's willing to help each other out. But
Yeah.
these are, when you play it, you have that simple D10 mechanic. A failure doesn't always mean you die. However, the game advises you as a game master, be true to the fiction, guard the fiction. Bad things will happen to your players. Let it happen, because then your players will experience all the wonders of the game. Death is not the end. It's just
Yeah.
one stop on the path of suns, and let your players experience it. You might feel a protective nature. Just be willing to let the game play out and discover all these wondrous things.
So, Grant, I know that our time is drawing short. I have two questions. One of them is just a very quick. I feel like games sort themselves out into two camps. One is the camp in which the player's role determines everything about an engagement. When I attack the demon, if it hits me, is determined by my role to attack it. That's like Blades in the Dark or Apocalypse World or Dungeon World. Versus like Dungeons and Dragons, the demon rolls dice to attack me instead. Which of these camps does Invisible Sun fall in?
Game masters roll no dice.
Cool.
Yeah,
That's
it's
super cool.
players roll everything. The game master will play sooth cards and adjudicate the scenes, for they know the setting, the nature, and the statistics of the demon, what it means if you fail to resist, dodge, or withstand it. But they put all the agency into the player's hands.
Awesome. I really like that. Especially as a game master, I feel like I have enough on my plate that not needing to roll dice for my enemies and instead just adjudicating the responses to the player's actions is my preferred method these days. The last and final question is that big thorny one, the one of cost. Grant, tell me, is there any way for me, not me, Steven Lumpkin, but me, a player who is listening and wondering about Invisible Sun, is there any way for me, that player who is curious about it, to experience this game without dropping $250 on it? Is there like an art-free PDF that's just 50 or something? Like, is Monty Cook making this game accessible to people who don't have a free 250 to drop? And I know that lots of people like to say, get together with your play group and everybody chip in. Man, not everybody has a play group yet. Talk to me, Grant. Tell me about it.
So some of the ways that they've helped assist, outside of running at conventions, is outside of the setting. Between the PDFs, the character tomes that I brought up, you can download those for free. You can buy the decks of cards separately, and you could piecemeal the game together without the setting for much, much cheaper. The reason they go with the cube is they wanted to sell a game that contained all the components a group would need to play. A good example with, say, Dungeons and Dragons, well, there's 3 core books, a published adventure if you don't know how to write one yet, dice, maps, a DM screen, player cards. You want all these components that quickly exceeds $400. I know because I spent it. And I know you spent it and couldn't ship all of your books with you to Europe. So you know the cost, what happens when you go in very expensively on a what I would call a deluxe game system, and
Totally.
you're making a system-wide purchase. So some of the things they're doing is based on Kickstarter stretch goals, making PDF versions available at reduced costs. They are increasing the availability of props, assets, etc. However, it's also by design a system buy-in. And they did do the group vouchers with the pre-orders where, 4 people can go in. Essentially, though, what they want is a group to be fully equipped to receive the intended play experience, where
Yeah.
you will be empowered to explore the actuality in fullness. And also, the Kickstarter is to pay for a reprinting because the game was printed and sold out immediately. There's copies of the cube in the wild, and the prices vary. But to back on Kickstarter, in order to experience the game as it is, I would say the mechanics, mechanically, it's almost Ars Magica. You can have a D10 system and you can add traits and modifiers. But to get the physical components, you do go in all the way. However, you could piecemeal it as much as you need to.
Yeah.
you simply won't have access to, uh, I would say, the secrets, and as well as possibly some of the additional play aid help to facilitate the game. Um,
Yeah.
it's also, I think it's very playable online. I
Hmm.
need to
Hmm.
stress that, and I think we're going to start to see more and more electronic equivalencies while maintaining the spirit of a physical deluxe play.
Yeah. So I know we have to leave, but I think at the end of this conversation, which was like a conversation to answer Steven's curiosity about Invisible Sun, I feel like I should bookend this by talking about how my curiosity has changed over the course of our conversation. First of all, I come away from our chat, Grant. Thank you very much for taking your time to do this with me. I am much more curious about Invisible Sun. I would say there's like a 60 to 70% chance that I go over to the Kickstarter after this, and maybe I'm unboxing a cube sometime in the upcoming future. I'm very curious, but I'm also like I'm a core fan. I'm a core gamer, whatever that means for like tabletop role playing games. I think if there was something that I could say to Monty Cook Games if they do watch the VOD, like they said that they would, sounds like y'all have made something really interesting here. Grant has convinced me on a number of the components that you've put together. I still wish that for people like me who are not me, who don't have the opportunity to sit in a call with Grant to tell them about your game, I wish there was a $30 product that I could buy, play, and run with my friends that would give me the experience to tell me yes or no, do I want to buy the $250 physical item? I think that's a really important missing thing because, like you talked about Dungeons and Dragons and being able to sort of cobble together things. The advantage I think Fifth Edition D&D has is if you buy the starter set, that's literally everything you
Yep,
need to tell you. Do I want to buy the rest of it? So
100%.
I think that's definitely a direction Monty Cook Games should consider. However, I now understand a lot more about why they've done the pricing that they've done and the product that they've done. So, at the end of the day, Grant, I'm super curious, super interested. Thank you for taking the time with this. I'll let you take it away and say the final words, but thank you. I appreciate everything that you put together.
In my advice to those of you that have the cube and run Invisible Sun and own it is to share the treasures that it provides with the world. If that means going to a game store and running sessions for people, if you're comfortable with doing that, if you live near a game store, if you need help running it online to run for a global audience. I know a number of people that have accessed the cube, and the biggest barrier to sharing it with more people simply is not necessarily being plugged into the online or streaming community. If you know people that have it and you want to play the game, ask them about playing it. Definitely share the game. I know I'm going to start running production for 3 or 4 other game masters so the world can see different styles of running a game this beautifully. Definitely, there's a couple things I recommend as you do that. Invite people that live in different locations than yourselves and may not have the opportunity. Invite people that have different opinions than you. Invite people that present and represent themselves diversely than yourselves, women, non-binary individuals. Try to reach out to a variety of ethnic backgrounds because we are a global family of people, as well as make sure that you give the opportunities to more people than just your immediate friends. That's kind of been my mission with the game, to really diversify the player audience. So I want to leave on that. If you have a copy or you're thinking about getting one, do share the treasures with everyone. It's why we're on this call. It's a game so cool that I had to put my day job on hold to talk about it.
Yeah, and in additional continued credit to Monty Cook Games, all of the material of the game is explicitly inclusive of all races, all genders, all ethnicities, all kinds of people, all sexualities. They even explicitly talk about using the singular they as the pronoun of choice within their products. I think they've really done a lot of good, so I second everything you just said, Grant.
All right. Well, thank you all for watching so much here on WebDM with Steven and myself. Um, we are getting ready for the RPG Sports D&D World Championships. Yay, the other side of gaming, I like to call it. And that's why they're like, competitive D&D, what does it become to? And they go, and they got the Invisible Sun GM to run this tournament. So thank you so much, Steven, for taking the time to talk about a game I'm very passionate about. Thank you, Monty Cook, for producing the product. We plugged your Kickstarter, and thank you, WebDM, for allowing us to run this on your channel. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.